I wanted to share some recent ROCD, relationship OCD themes that I've been seeing in clients and some thoughts on what can help and what can support recovery. So, the first one is the issues with checking. So, checking how we feel, checking for attraction, checking for feelings of love, monitoring and checking that within ourselves. And like any checking compulsion, and they've done studies on this in people without OCD, you check enough times, you start to feel more uncertain. They can get people without checking OCD to check a door. You do it enough times, you start to doubt it yourself. So it's the same with this, and actually feelings are even more complex because the more we put pressure on having a certain emotion, the more it evaporates. The more we look for a feeling and we appraise a lack of feeling and emptiness or another feeling, frustration or hurt or other emotions, the more we search for the love, the more we amplify those other emotions. It's like any anxiety disorder or mood disorder. Actually, the checking of emotion is the thing that interrupts the natural flow of emotion, like the weather, which no one ever feels 100% love all the time for anyone. It goes up and down. Some days we feel lower in mood. Some days we feel great and it's up and down. And the more we can allow all emotions to rise and fall, the better our emotion system's going to work. Like anything, the more we try and control it, the more likely it is to interrupt itself and get paradoxical effects where the more we push for something, the more we don't get it. Like sleep, the more you try and fall asleep, the more you wake up. So we have these paradoxical effects. We have the impact of checking and monitoring more threat systems. So we're getting more and more anxious, might be getting more and more numb. And so essentially, we can't be checking our emotions to see if this is the right relationship, even though that's exactly what a lot of advice online will tell you to trust feelings and lots of therapies, lots of approaches, lots of popular psychology coaching will almost say that emotions are like this perfect guide in our life when really evolutional psychologists, biologists, neuroscientists will say that they are information and sometimes they're helpful, sometimes they're misfiring though. If you treat emotion as a barometer of what you should do in life, that is a sure way into panic disorder and avoidance because we trust that anxiety and we think, oh, it must be unsafe and we avoid, or into low mood. We follow the low mood into inactivity and staying in bed, and that's how I feel, and it feels false to talk to people, and we get more and more depressed. So there are so many times where following your emotion is not the thing that will lead to the life you want to live. Instead, we have to follow values. So actually, the less we check our emotions, the more likely they are to come back. You imagine if I said to you, think of your favorite food and now spend 8 hours checking how you feel about it, ruminating how you feel about it. Are you really at the end of that 8 hours going to be more certain of what you feel about that food? Or are you going to be more confused, tangled up, and not even sure you like food at all by the end of it? So, the checking, the ruminating, those compulsions are a huge part of this, as they are in all OCD. And the comparison of feelings, we start checking for feelings about someone else, and we're all anxious about it, and that other person might be attractive, and they might be someone that, aligns well with us. And of course, that suddenly feels really good. And then we test that against, our existing relationship, and we're going to get less feeling. And again, it's not an accurate portrayal. If I um, if I like a sport and, I'm enjoying that sport for a long period of time, and then I think, maybe I'd like this other sport, even just thinking about it might be exciting. Humans like novelty, like change. Sometimes it's easier to start something new and progress than it is to stick with an existing sport and work hard at it. So it might feel really appealing, but if you want to get really good in the sport you're doing, you need to give it longer. You need to break through plateaus. You need to work hard for mastery. So I think it's a good analogy. It's a very similar sort of thing. There's the next one is really this idea that someone else completes us, or all of our happiness is determined by the romantic relationship we choose. And this is not the case, actually. We have a happiness set point, and then we have a portion of happiness we can influence, and relationships do influence that portion of happiness. But it's all our relationships, it's our friendship, our family, our intimate relationships, our relationships with, our pets. Like, it's not just one relationship that influences that quota, and that quota is not all relationship that dictates it. There's meaningful life goals, hobbies, interests, managing your stress level, how you respond to suffering and difficulty. So really we have a set point. So yes, a new relationship, when you have the type of ROCD that's like end the relationship, it can, you end that relationship. Yeah, the next relationship, you might get the honeymoon period, you might get an initial boost, but then your happiness will go back. And then often with ROCD, you start to regret, you start to see that the previous relationship was good enough, not very romantic to say, but good enough. That's what humans need. We need good enough friends, we need to be a good enough parent, we need to be a good enough therapist. You can't aim for perfection, it has to be good enough. Hollywood movies portray perfection, they don't portray good enough, although sometimes they show flawed humans and they show more accurate portrayal of relationships. But historically, that hasn't been the case. It's always been these overly romanticized, fictional myth of the one type relationships. So, we need to see that actually I control my future happiness with the choices I make, the skills I develop, and how good I get at suffering. With all of these points, making the caveat that if we're in a really problematic relationship, which is abusive and has significant issues, it's a different matter. We're not talking about this here. But if it's a good enough relationship, actually, what I give to that relationship and what I contribute and how I put my values into it is going to determine my happiness much more than is it perfect and then ruminating and thinking about that the whole time. Um, Next one is ROCD will exaggerate normal relationship frustration. So everyone's annoying to live with. Um, it is difficult to be in long-term relationships. No one will meet all of our needs. We often need multiple people to be a supportive friend and interesting and exciting, attractive. We can't always get that from one partner. We need different friendships that might provide different meet different needs for us. So a lot of cultures don't put that pressure on one person to meet all of those needs, and they're often much happier. The baseline levels of happiness are higher in those cultures. So there's lots of natural frustration. No one will meet all your needs. Relationships need work. They need lots of communication, and they go through stages, they evolve, and OCD will latch onto all this stuff and then exaggerate it and convey that it's a deal breaker when really it's a place to work. It's something to get better at. It's like, again, with the sport, seeing any difficulty we have as a sign to end playing that sport versus actually I need coaching, I need to think about it, I need to practice specific skills, I need to drill certain things. Um, Attachment style difficulties can feed into this. So sometimes, rarely are we going to be securely attached, although maybe there are people with ROCD with secure attachment, but I often see people with anxious ambivalent attachment and anxious avoidant. So the two anxious attachment styles, and sometimes you have the ambivalent style, which I don't think is a great name for it. Calling it an anxious attachment it might be more accurate where we need a lot of reassurance, we need, connection and constantly to be shown that we are loved and we are good enough, versus the anxious avoidant style where we feel suffocated, we need space, we need agency. And this maps onto history. I mean, it's partly genetic, but it's also a history where we might have felt too controlled, and it's quite scary to be in that sense of being controlled again. Whereas the anxious ambivalent, we haven't had a secure, reliable caregiver, so we're sort of clinging on to try and feel safe. And so you get the pairings of those attachment styles, and then our OCD latches on to, is this person too distant, too avoidant, or this person's not, they're not supporting me enough, they're not there for me enough. And again, these are things to work on together as a couple, as two flawed humans learning and growing together and trying to support each other. Um, a big one you see nowadays is you see a lot of social signaling online. So people are all trying to portray they have the best life style, they're most successful. I mean, this is really human dominance hierarchy, and it's like the chimpanzees trying to signal that they're the dominant ones in the group. We're wanting to show we have the best life, and we're people are often demonstrating the best relationships. They're talking about very romantic, simplified versions of relationships. Who are sort of saying love of the life, and I knew as soon as I met them, and they are amazing and incredible. And you don't really know what's going on behind closed doors. I know as a therapist speaking to these people, the reality can be very different. So you be careful of what you see in other people online, what you generalize from your favorite celebrities or cultural figures. And the reality is human relationships are much messier. There might be a small group of people where it's pretty simple and both partners are highly agreeable and they kind of intuitively know a relationship takes work. They're very patient and they are leaning in and savoring and nurturing the positive, and often they're securely attached. Okay, that's a small number of people. Most people aren't like that, and it's much messier. And yes, there's another subgroup where relationships are problematic and toxic, but then there's a middle group, the biggest group I think that I see in the world, where relationships are messy. No one can meet all your needs. We need to work on them. We need to see them as a garden that we are nurturing over time. Um, and really, there aren't universal rules for relationships. There's not one right way to do it. So these people that say, write the articles and say you should feel a certain way and it should progress a certain way. No, there is only your relationship, your own attachment style, your own history, your own anxieties about connection, your own goals in life. Everyone is so variable and different that there isn't like one universal approach to relationships. And it's really, something that people do to sell books and to get YouTube and social media followers, and grow audiences, like to make these really simplified narratives. I mean, they don't account for massive cultures where the whole dating experience is completely different, and actually, some of those cultures you see better outcomes in marriage and other things. So, it's really this, there aren't universal rules for relationships. You are an individual, you might have had a feeling of meeting the one, you might not have done. You might have had a honeymoon period, you might not have done. You might have actually had a slow build to your relationship that deepened over time. You might have had an explosive, intense relationship that slowed, and you might have one that goes up and down. It's you just can't make these general rules, and people will then, with our OCD, will look at these rules and go, "Oh, it must be something wrong with my relationship because I'm not like celebrity X on their podcast saying how incredible their relationship is, who, 6 months later you see us getting divorced." Um, it really just isn't that simple, human relationships. And it is normal for people to feel ambivalent, mixed feelings. The 7 year itch is a very common thing, but it doesn't have to be 7 years to feel dissatisfaction and to feel uncertain about your relationship is common. in people without OCD, let alone people with OCD. And really, we don't account for this ambivalence that we can have mixed feelings. We can absolutely love someone and really want our independence and time alone. We can, feel like this person isn't meeting all our needs, but love them greatly. There can be, such mixed feelings. So the OCD takes these mixed feelings and only focuses on one side of it. So everyone has mixed feelings about every person in their life that's important to them. You never constantly feel states of love with romantic partners. You never constantly feel, heightened attraction. Everything will fluctuate, everything will change. At times, we'll actually feel like we want space and we want time apart. And, healthy relationships do have this time together, time apart, this secure base, safe haven that we can feel connected in, and then we go out into the world and experience life and then come back together and the relationship's healthier because of that. But OCD will take these sorts of feelings, natural annoyance, frustration. If we're stressed, we get more frustrated. I think we all know you're more irritable with people if you're feeling a heightened state of stress. Even, people you love, and OCD is very stressful to live in. So, of course, you can become more irritable and less tolerant, and then little things people do start to frustrate you and annoy you more. So OCD will feed on these natural mixed feelings, ambivalence that we have, and that we all experience. And someone without OCD is just like, yeah, I can't stand my partner today, or yeah, I can't stand anyone today. I'm feeling really moody, and they just see that as like the natural flow of emotion. There's a cultural thing. There's like this fixation on the bigger, better offer, and the dating apps really manifest this. I work with lots of clients who tell me all about dating apps, which fortunately I was when I was going through OCD and mental health difficulties, dating apps weren't a thing. So I can only be grateful for that. But I learned from my clients and people that I know using them. And it's like there's a cultural relationship OCD. Everyone is just trying to maximize, and we're exposed to the most beautiful, attractive, successful people in the world on social media and their relationships and how they socially signal what their relationships, what their life is like, their family life is like, not seeing what it may really be like and the complexity of it all. And so everyone is sort of viewing themselves as that type of person, that kind of brand, really. And part of my brand is having the best person on my arm. And it really leads to a lot of suffering and a lot of unhappiness as people give up on the good enough relationships and the good enough dates and the good enough matches. If you think about the cultures that we evolved in, where families and then they came together and lived in villages and small groups of 50 to 100. And smaller subgroups within that, like you really would know everyone in that community, and so you would have known the people that you might end up in romantic relationships with since being a kid, and you wouldn't be exposed to, I mean, yes, they did seek partners outside of their communities at times. And if you look at like the Hansa tribe and modern indigenous tribes, like yes, they sometimes seek partners outside of them, but really, you would know all the possible matches, and so you've already made friends, you've already been bonding with people, and then that ends up becoming relationships, and it would be very different to our modern world, right? So our brain is really not evolved for this modern world and what's being sold to us culturally. I think our own self-esteem feeds into it. If your higher self-esteem around dating and you have had success dating, that can work against you because you're always trying to maximize. You have the experience that you know you can meet people, you can charm people, you can seduce people and get into relationships. So then you're always chasing, the better offer. If you have lower self-esteem, then your relationship OCD might show up around ruminating just about the relationship, about questions about am I doing well enough for your own place in the relationship, or, ruminating about trying to get your needs met and what you should speak out about, what you shouldn't. Sometimes clients like that end up in difficult relationships where they're not always expressing their needs, and then they're often doing a lot of OCD rumination about the relationship. I had this when I was younger. I was in, relationships where I would have our OCD. Really, I wasn't being treated very well, really, and I wasn't standing up for myself because I was very anxious and struggling with my mental health. And then I would be ruminating all the time, trying to make sense of, like, was this behavior fair? Was it not? What should I do? What are my options? Round and round and round and round, and never taking action. And so ROCD can show up in these different ways depending on your self-esteem. I think that it can latch on to other types of relationships, family, friendships. We could be ruminating about, are our friends good enough? Are we good enough for our friends? What does family members think of us? Even family members that we know, we don't really care what they think about us. We're still, doing a lot of mental compulsion, analysis, rumination, worry, test and check in, reassurance seeking about these different relationships, even pets, even relationships with, our religion or other things like that. So it can really latch on to any doubt within relationship and worry about our place in it, the other person's place in it, both. It really can fixate on anything. So, the compulsions are really the big issue there, the mental compulsion that is just analyzing and testing and checking and worrying about the relationships and the choices and the behaviors. It can also latch on to different triggers. So it can I think about it of triggers within triggers. So the overall category is relationship, but within that, it can latch on to feelings, as we said, or lack of feelings, or is this the right intensity of feeling? It can latch on to, yeah, our own thoughts, our own different aspects of our own experience, but often it's going to be visual, image, appearance, the things that someone says, the responses, the behavioral patterns between us, the sort of negative behavior that everyone experiences and does in relationships. Often our OCD will forget that we're also imperfect, and it'll put the judgment on the other, and it'll forget that, like, we're a flawed human, we say annoying things, we don't always look our best, we're going to go up and down in terms of our appearance, and we're all getting older. Different aspects of our own imperfection it will forget about. So it really latches on to these different triggers within triggers. It might be the comparison. It might be other potential partners, other attractive people become the triggers. It might blend themes and bring in, like, sexual orientation OCD and relationship OCD or other combinations. And so it's really good for us to understand our own idiosyncratic personal expression of our OCD. So what are those different components, the triggers, the thoughts, the images, the emotions, sensations, the relationship with the other person, what is triggering us there. So to really map it all out and understand, what's happening, what are we checking, tracking, and monitoring in our partner or within ourselves or against other people. And then we know where to interrupt this with our skills, with acceptance commitment therapy skills or other mindfulness skills, and where to target our exposure and response prevention. It will trap us in these can't win situations. So that it will say the partner's too affectionate and too romantic, or they're too remote. So it's like they're either too kind of mushy and affectionate, or they're too distant and not affectionate enough. So the brain will trap you between these, like it can't win either way. Um, Perfectionism and hyper awareness of small details. Um, our mind will resist our recovery work. So as you're working on recovery with a relationship OCD, it'll throw in things like, why am I still getting these thoughts? It must mean something, even though I'm doing ERP, I'm doing ACT, I'm nurturing my relationship. Why are they sticking around? Or will have other ways. It'll jump onto different parts of the relationship. It'll get more complicated in its argument, or more go after greater levels of uncertainty. So we've got to be ready for our mind to resist as we work on recovery. Um, and these are some of the things I've seen a lot recently. Feel free to ask any questions about relationship OCD and any specific difficulties, and we can cover more of that. I think it's important to have the right psychoeducation and correct these beliefs around relationship that simply don't fit reality and have been socially conditioned into us from being very little. I mean, I've got young kids just now, and even from a very young age, you see the books they read, the TV shows they get exposed to, the sort of simplistic narratives of romance. Um, it really gets in culturally from a very young age. Other cultures, they're not getting the same message, and have a very different pattern of OCD. It latches onto other things. Um, so we need to understand where these beliefs don't fit with reality, to not to recover from OCD, but in order to motivate our recovery work and ultimately letting go of the compulsions. Um, so you could identify some of your beliefs that you have heard in this video, and the ones that aren't serving you. Do you have the myth of the one? Do you have the they must complete me? Do you have the other people are all having these incredible relationships compared with mine? Do you have my partner must meet every single one of my emotional, physical, mental, spiritual needs? Uh, do you have unworkable beliefs around feelings and what feelings mean, and that I should always trust my feelings? So identifying what those beliefs are and realizing what are more realistic, practical, workable beliefs that fit with reality. Um, as always, I advocate for developing our skills, primarily using acceptance and commitment therapy. But again, it could be mindfulness-based CBT or metacognitive therapy or other tools. But learning to observe the intrusive thoughts, the emotional lack of emotion, catch the monitoring and checking we're doing, interrupt that, to learn to use these mindfulness and acceptance skills to reduce all the mental compulsions and the checking and monitoring, and instead get our attention out. And I always use the example of, we don't want to be the person who's in the movie going over and over, how does it compare to the last movie this director did? Do I like it as much as this other movie? Test and check in for 2 hours, how I feel about the movie. We want to learn to step out of that with our diffusion skills. And if you don't understand diffusion, have a look on the channel and you'll understand that. learn to observe our feelings without taking them as literal absolute truth, but as something that we can observe and choose whether it's helpful or not to follow, and then to engage in the movie and be focused on the movie. And actually, the better we do that, the more our feelings are going to come and go, and we'll really know what we feel about the movie more accurately. Um, so we really want to go over the monitoring and checking. Are we checking how they look? Are we monitoring what they're saying, how they sound? Are we checking and monitoring our feelings? Are we then ruminating, worrying, analyzing, testing, comparing? What are the compulsions we're doing that are feeding the ROCD, and then practicing interrupting them with skills. We want to build up to doing more ERP, either the situational ERP of being in this relationship and really committing and making it as good as possible, or being around people that we've avoided if we've avoided other attractive people or other people that are triggering. We want to just sort of think about what are the triggering situations, how do we gradually push into that more and more, and practice our act skills to help us not do the compulsions, essentially to reduce the compulsions that we're doing. I always think about nurturing the relationship and putting our values into the relationship as a great area of ERP. I like gratitude for our partner as an ERP. The more I express gratitude, the more my mind's going to say, oh, you don't really feel that, or you don't really believe that. Okay, then we're doing exposure, we're diffusing that, we're coming back to the gratitude. So I tend to like ERP where we do as many different categories as possible. So we're doing exposure to the thoughts that are difficult, the images that may be tricky. We're doing diffusion to content, videos, things we're reading, literature, songs, ROCD, and music is often a big trigger. Love songs, and how many love songs are written about unrealistic views on relationship, during a loved up, hormonally charged phase of relationship that doesn't reflect the reality of a long-term relationship and the work it takes. So doing ERP to as many different triggers that we can think of, and then the situational ERP being the most important, the values-based behavioral ERP out in the world, taking us towards a meaningful life and the life we want to live. So we could think about our relationship values, our goals in relationship. How do I nurture? How do I meet the other person's needs? If how do I balance if they're not meeting my needs and there are relationship issues to work on? How do I have those difficult conversations and discuss, emotional intimacy, physical intimacy, the maintaining of a strong relationship over a longer period of time, if that's what I'm interested in. We're doing exposure in all these different ways, and we're using act skills to help us to let go of the mental compulsions, to urge surf the physical compulsions, and to be present and engaged in a relationship. So you could look at some of the ideas on ERP, values-based ERP on the channel, look at the OCD skills playlist. You'll get a sense of what I'm talking about here and how to apply it. And then practice, 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 and practice targeted skills and exposure work, and then responding well in the moment. So all the time I'm around my partner becomes practice time. How do I work these skills and reduce the compulsions while I'm with my partner, and really focus and engage and be present with them and think about them and think about their needs and think about my needs and balance all these things. So yeah, any questions, please put them down below in the comments or drop me an email. Very happy to hear what people are struggling with and thinking about how we can target more specific things. But these are some of the themes I've been seeing in relationship OCD recently. Um, so I hope it's helpful.